Russia likes to present itself as a food security fortress. It takes pride in producing most of its own food and ranking among the world's largest exporters of grain and vegetable oil. And yet, just as farmers need to bring in the harvest, they are facing an awkward question. Where are they supposed to get fuel for their machines? In recent months, Ukrainian drones have repeatedly struck Russian refineries. The military gets priority. Big cities are supplied first because the fuel shortages there could quickly turn political indifference into anger. Agriculture is further down the line. But agriculture cannot wait politely in line. Wheat does not pause while officials write reports. Vegetables do not wait for diesel deliveries. Cows do not stop needing feed because a refinery is burning somewhere far away. So, what happens when a country this large can no longer reliably fuel its own harvest? Russians are not going to starve tomorrow, but the consequences could still reach far beyond the farm fields. I am Elvira Bary, a writer born in the Soviet Union, and today I'll show you how Russia's fuel crisis makes its way into the grocery store and how it might affect the country's already strained agriculture. Here's our roadmap: the food machine, what Russia grows and why the system was already strained. When the harvest runs out of fuel, how diesel shortages can turn a successful harvest into losses for farmers and higher food costs across Russia. The grocery bill, how this reaches bread, milk, eggs, meat, and vegetables. The state's choice, what Moscow can do and why every fix has a price. If you'd like to keep getting this kind of insight, please subscribe, like, share, join my think tank, support through PayPal or Super Thanks, or tap Hype Points. That is how this channel stays independent and keeps doing deeper analysis. And if you're listening on Spotify, follow the show so the next episode lands in your feed automatically. Thank you for being here. Let's begin. The food machine. Russia's agriculture is more fragile than it looks. Start with grain. Russia is the world's third largest producer and exporter of wheat, following China and India. In June, the U.S. Department of Agriculture raised its forecast for Russia's 2026 wheat crop to 88 million tons after favorable weather supported winter wheat. On paper, that sounds impressive. And Russian fields look just as impressive as you move across the country. The south of Russia grows wheat, barley, corn, sunflower, and vegetables. Krasnodar, Rostov, and Stavropol are the heart of Russian farming, thanks to their relatively warm climate. Then comes the central Black Earth region with extremely rich soil: Voronezh, Belgorod, Kursk, Tambov, Lipetsk. That's where they grow sugar beet, sunflower, feed for livestock, and more grain. Further east, the Volga region and Siberia matters for grain, dairy, meat, and spring wheat. So Russia can grow enormous amounts of food. It is self-sufficient in most major food groups except for milk, vegetables, and fruit, where it relies on imports to some extent. But modern agriculture is a complex machine with many moving parts. In Russia, this machine depends on vulnerable inputs: imported seeds for crops, imported breeding material and animal genetics, imported veterinary drugs, imported electronics and spare parts for machinery. Even when the final product is Russian wheat or Russian chicken, the road to that product is paved by things that Russia doesn't make. And before the fuel crisis, this machine was already under stress. In June, the Bank of Russia cut its key rate to 14.25%. That is still expensive money. For a farmer, credit is often the only way to buy diesel before you have any grain to sell. It is how you pay workers before you sell the harvest. It is how you repair a combine when it breaks in the field. High rates turn every friction into a dead problem. Then comes weather. This spring harvesting in several major regions was already running late because of cool weather and rain, 1 to 2 weeks behind last year's pace. By early July, Russia had threshed only about 3% of its grain area, 3 times down against 9% last year. Now add expensive diesel. The Kremlin loves to speak about food sovereignty, but real food sovereignty requires strong supply chain. And now the fuel crisis has hit an already overburdened machine. That machine still works, but it's only because thousands of people keep forcing it to forward with improvisation. When the harvest runs out of fuel. In modern agriculture, diesel is blood, and farm can have good soil, healthy crops, and perfect machinery, but none of that matters if the machines cannot move when the harvest window opens. That window is narrow. Reports from Russia's grain-producing regions already show farmers worrying that they may not be able to harvest on time because diesel is either unavailable or too expensive. Putin himself has publicly stressed the need to maintain fuel supplies to agriculture. The fact that the Kremlin had to intervene says something about the seriousness of the problem. The arithmetic is unforgiving. Russian analysts estimate that harvesting 1 hectare required roughly 10 to 20 liters of diesel. A large farm works thousands of hectares, and harvesting is only part of the expense. The crop must still be transported, dried, loaded, and moved into storage. The more immediate problem is time. Fuel deliveries that once took 1 to 3 days may now take 5 to 10. A farmer cannot ask the weather to wait. If machinery sits idle and rain arrives, grain quality can deteriorate and drying costs rise. A delay in one field pushes back work in the next. The farmer may eventually collect the same number of tons but earn much less from them. Expensive diesel creates another problem. Farmers often finance the season with borrowed money. If fuel costs suddenly rise, they need more credit just to finish the same work. Unless grain prices rise enough to compensate, even a decent harvest can become unprofitable. And grain is only part of the story. Perishable crops such as vegetables are even less forgiving of delays. Livestock farming is also connected to the same system because animals depend on crops for feed. When the cost of producing and transporting that feed rises, meat and dairy farms feel it as well. This probably will not lead to animal dying across Russia because trucks arrive a few days late. The more realistic danger is economic. Feed becomes more expensive, while the weakest farms already operate on very thin margins. Large agricultural holdings are in better position. They can negotiate long-term contracts, maintain storage facilities, and sometimes keep their own fuel reserves. Small and medium-sized farms have far less protection. Some can store only enough diesel for a few weeks. The price difference already shows how unequal the crisis is becoming. Forbes Russia reported that diesel supplied to some farms had risen above 100,000 rubles per ton, roughly twice the February level. In Stavropol, region officials acknowledged that large producers were more or less supplied, while some smaller farmers were forced to buy diesel for as much as 140 rubles per liter. So the danger is not simply that Russia produces less food. The first effect may be a quieter one. Smaller farms lose money, debt grows, and agriculture becomes even more concentrated in the hands of giant companies that are better connected, better financed, and much harder for the state to ignore. The grocery bill. Sooner or later, every broken link in agriculture becomes a price tag in a grocery store. Fuel enters food price through many doors. The first door is obvious: field work. If diesel costs more, the harvest costs more. If diesel arrives late, the harvest may be smaller or lower quality. If the farmer needs more credit to buy fuel, interest becomes part of the food price too. The second door is transport. Grain has to move from field to elevators, from elevators to mills or ports. Milk has to move from farms to processing plants. Meat has to move through slaughterhouses, cold storage, and shops. Vegetables have to move fast because they do not wait. This year, road tariffs for grain transport rose by 20 to 30%. Rail and port logistics became more expensive too. The third door is storage. When transport is unreliable, storage becomes more important and more expensive. The fourth door is credit. When the key rate is high, farmers have to pay more to survive this season. For grain, fuel make up around 40% of total production costs, and diesel price for farmers has more than doubled since winter. The current bread price in Russian grocery stores might not yet reflect this new reality. Bread will be protected longer than other products because it is politically sensitive. Russian government knows very well that rising bread prices make people nervous. So the state will pressure mills, retailers, or regional officials to hold the line. But meat, dairy, egg, and vegetable prices are harder to freeze. Their supply chains are more complex. Their costs pile up faster. This is where propaganda becomes useless. You can tell people that inflation is under control, but if every link in the supply chain comes with a higher cost, somebody must absorb it. And that will be the end consumer, as large producers and retail chains will push their costs onward. Russia's official food inflation numbers can look calm if you only read the monthly average. In May, food prices even fell by 0.85% because seasonal vegetables got cheaper. But by late June, the weekly picture was already changing. Росстат data showed chicken up 1.6% in 1 week. The basic vegetable basket moved sharply, cabbage up 4.7%, potatoes up 4.5%, onions up 3.8%. That's the boring things that an average family puts on the table. So the new grocery bill is already here. The state's choice. Moscow can still patch the crisis. It has also considered a full diesel export ban, fuel imports, and emergency tax changes to stabilize the domestic market. Russia also began importing gasoline from India to ease shortages. Another proposal was to allow lower quality gasoline and diesel production or imports because the usual standards had become another bottleneck. Think about what this means. Russia is one of the world's major oil powers. It spent years frightening Europe that it will freeze in winter without Russian oil and gas. And now it is discussing imports and lower quality fuel so domestic shortages do not become politically explosive. But the Kremlin's tools all have costs. If Russia bans or restricts diesel exports, it loses export revenue. If it imports fuel, it spends hard currency and admits weakness. And if it protects only the biggest agricultural players, small farmers get crushed. That last point matters. In a normal market, the state would try to preserve competition. In Putin's system, the state preserves control. Big agroholdings are easy to manage. They are visible, connected, and useful. Small farmers are noisy, scattered, and harder to fold into one command chain, so the likely outcome is concentration. Bigger players survive, while smaller players are forced out. Rural life becomes more dependent on large companies and the state. The pain is already spread unevenly. While the average look decent, small farmers are taking the worst hit. One Rostov farmer expects his harvest to fall by 15%. In Kuban, another farmer is bracing up for losses of 30%. Putin's government can probably prevent the worst possible outcome. There will probably be no sudden national-wide food collapse, but prevention means more government spending, more dependence on administrative force, and more costs that a grocery buyer pays out of pocket. If this video helped you understand how Russia's fuel crisis can move from refineries into farm fields and finally onto the dinner table, please like, subscribe and share it with one person who still thinks fuel shortages are only about cars. And if you want to support this channel directly, you can join my think tank, leave a super thanks, support through PayPal, or tap hype points to help this episode travel further. For those listening on Spotify, follow the show so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for watching. See you the next time.